Hi everyone, Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton here with a special Judicial Watch update on the Iowa voting rolls issue. And joining me here for this special report is our own Bob Popper, who is a senior attorney here at Judicial Watch, who directs our election law initiatives. Thank you for joining us, Bob.
Thanks for having me.
So we had a lot of controversy this week. We were in the forefront in alerting people about some voter roll registration issues in Iowa, and we received some pushback. Can you describe what it is we found first?
Every 2 years, the Election Assistance Commission, a federal agency, releases data. This is data that was provided to the EAC by states and counties under federal law. This is data that chief state election officials in each state certify to the EAC as their official description.
And Iowa did that.
Yeah, Iowa did that, along with all the other states that report to the EAC.
So what did we find? So we take that data and what do we compare it to?
We compare it to contemporaneous census data. We use data describing the citizen voting age population in each county for as many counties as we can do, and we can typically do about 2,600 counties.
So this is certified federal data compared to census data that provides a snapshot of how clean or unclean our voter rolls are? What does it show?
Yes, what it shows in particular is it shows the registration rate of each county in the country. And a typical rate might be somewhere in the 80s or 90s, but if you have a registration rate of over 100%, which means that you have more registered voters than you have citizens over the age of 18 who could lawfully register, you might have a problem.
So generally speaking, like if you're in a county, about 75% of the people who live there are eligible or registered to vote.
Generally, yes.
So, but when you get to north of 95%, and when you get over 100%, there's something wrong.
There's something wrong even, I would say, in the high 90s or above 95%. But
Right.
what we do is we take this data and we rely on it. It has reliability because it is what the states and counties certified to the federal government.
And so how many counties did we examine?
2,600.
And we found that several hundred of them had voter registration rates above 100%.
Over 370.
So we issued an announcement about that. We sent warnings to various states, 5 states, and we found nationally there were 2.5 million names extra on the rolls, meaning they were in counties that had, what, 100 plus?
If you took the counties with 100% plus registration and you added up all of the registrations in excess of 100, yes, you could get to 2.5 million.
So of those 2.5 million, you know, the Iowa caucuses come around. And so we're looking at the data for Iowa, and we find what in terms of what their issues are.
We found 8 counties in Iowa with registration rates exceeding 100%.
And based on what data again?
This is data certified by the current Secretary of State, or by the Secretary of State at the time the data was provided to the federal government, certified to be the registration data from the state. This is what the state supplied to the federal government, along with its assurance that this was accurate.
So this snapshot, based on a study that we'd be willing to go to court to defend, I would think.
Well, we anticipate going to court to defend.
Right. Shows that there are 8 counties in Iowa with extra names on the rolls.
Yes, at the time the data was released by the Election Assistance Commission in the middle of 2019.
So we put the information out there showing that there were 8 counties with extra names on the rolls, and totaling around only 18,000 names, but in Iowa that's a significant number evidently. And what's the pushback? You know, we've got the information, we're releasing it, educating people about it, and what's the pushback?
Well, the pushback was that the current Secretary of State has argued that current data does not show the same number of excessive registrations. And they put out data that they had not certified to the federal government, but which they allege is current. And they say that using current population estimates, to the extent, you know, population estimating is its own special art and science. And it's always a lagging indicator. You always have to look to some extent to the past. But, you know, within those tolerances, they argue that there are fewer counties that are over 100%. Now, if you believe their current registration numbers, which again, they're putting out in the middle of a public firefight over data.
Right.
And they're saying, these are our numbers. And if tomorrow they say, well, we were wrong about those numbers, it doesn't mean as much as it does if they certify numbers to the federal government and then later try to walk away from those numbers. But assuming that their numbers are largely accurate, what we found, and what has been verified by, for example, the Washington Post, what we found is that there are still 5 counties with registration rates at or exceeding 100%.
So let me get this straight. So we put out this information saying, look, we looked at this data at this time, and it shows 8 counties with voter registration rates above 100%.
Yes.
Which means they're really not following the law. And they're saying, oh, no, you're wrong. It's old data. So the new data says, oh, it's 5 counties over 100%, which to me is perfectly consistent with our analysis.
You would think that you could sue under the National Voter Registration Act each of those 5 counties, and possibly in addition the state of Iowa, with the assumption that the current figures are accurate.
Does the new data undermine our analysis?
No, it confirms it. It's consistent with it. It's in the same area. Now, if they have undertaken a program to remove significant numbers of inactive registrations from the voter rolls, then it's possible that the numbers have changed. It's possible that their current data is in fact the accurate statement of their registration records. And it's possible that a new estimate of the population of the state of Iowa and of each of those counties, compared to those registration numbers, will show different numbers. It is possible that in fact 5 instead of 8 counties are what I would call underwater, or in a registration profile that is not realistic.
Look, what I'm hearing is that we have the baseline data, and they're just trying to argue.
Well, yes, in so many ways. I mean, first, having any counties where the registration rate is greater than the number of citizens who possibly could register is not a good thing. It's not, you don't brag that you only have 5.
Our rolls aren't as dirty as you say they are.
Yes, but
they're still pretty darn dirty.
They are, and it's a distraction from a whole host of other issues. I mean, when we look at states, we also analyze which states have reported removing people pursuant to the provisions of the law we enforce, the NVRA.
So meaning that there are names on the rolls that after time generally need to be removed because they're inactive or not voting and no one knows where they are.
Right, and not just as a matter of policy, as a matter of law.
Right.
Need to be removed as in it's unlawful not to remove them.
Is Iowa maybe doing that?
Well, it's hard to say at this point. I think there are indications that they have not taken the care of their rolls that they ought to have taken. And a lot of these counties that we're looking at have reported to the EAC that they have removed very few citizens or individuals in a 2-year period under the provisions of the NVRA that apply. That matters. That's something that we look at. That's something that we care about. We also care about the number of inactive registrations. And I'd particularly like to address this because I've never seen so much nonsense about inactive and active registrations as I've seen in the past 2 days.
Well, I love Iowa. They say, oh, our rolls are fine if you exclude the dirty names, which are the inactive registrations.
Right.
What are inactive registrations?
If someone is sent a letter under the National Voter Registration Act and they don't respond to it, then you wait a period under the federal law of 2 general federal elections, so that could be from 2 to 4 years, and then that registration is removed. It's removed from the rolls. Now you can re-register the next day, but it's removed. If during that period of time you call the director of elections or the elections division, or you show up and vote in any election, you're back on the rolls, the clock stops, you're good.
What exactly is an inactive registration?
An inactive registration is a registration belonging to a person who was sent one of those letters and hasn't responded. And we're waiting for the statutory period to elapse. They're called inactive registrations, but they can be voted on election day.
So there's no distinction.
No realistic one. I mean, if you're coming up with a list and you're going to represent to someone that these are the registered voters in such and such a state, it would include everyone who could vote on election day. That would be your registration list.
And to be clear, if you're an inactive voter and you still live in the area, you can still vote. And Don't let the liberal media tell you otherwise by suggesting that your name is no longer valid.
No, you are not second class in any way when it comes to election day. You can get out there and you can vote. But that's the point. That's what the voter roll is, active and inactive. Now, in a way, I hate to even talk about it that way because inactive is a sort of in-the-weeds legal definition that comes out of the NVRA. They're voters. They're registered voters and the entire set can vote. There is no rationale, as has been argued, I think, by people who don't understand the law on the internet. There is no rationale for treating inactive voters differently from active voters. They can vote on election day.
Well, there is a political rationale, but by pretending the inactive voters don't count, it makes the voting rolls look cleaner than they actually are.
Yes, it does, but federal courts don't put up with that nonsense, and I'm a lawyer. I have to show up in federal court. I mean, we just concluded an agreement with Los Angeles County. What was the purpose? To start processing 1.5 million inactive registrations.
Right.
If they don't matter, why are we doing that? Why did a federal court bless that? We did the same thing in Kentucky and got a consent judgment about removing inactive registrations. If they don't matter, why did the federal court care? It's not just wrong, it's wrong-headed.
So are those attacking us have suggested we don't know what we're doing and our data is not to be trusted. But this data has held up, or at least our approach has held up, as you point out, in various federal courts.
Yeah.
So can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, a lot of the arguments I've seen are know-nothing arguments. I mean, the fact is, the law cares. Common sense says you should care about everyone who can vote on election day. Federal courts care. They care if you go into court and say, look, they have a high registration rate and they have these other problems. That is enough for a federal court to say, you have a case. You have a case under the NVRA that the state is not policing its voter rolls as it ought to do.
So what next in Iowa? We've got this information out there. People are suggesting it's wrong because newer data, which confirms it's right, shows that rolls are still dirty. Is there the potential for additional litigation? I mean, we've warned, Virginia, North Carolina, California, Colorado. What's the fifth state?
Well, I'm thinking additional litigation by us against some of these know-nothings.
Well, that's a different issue. I'm talking about Iowa.
Because should leave that alone.
So what's next? Federal law allows us to sue to make sure states are doing what they're supposed to in terms of taking reasonable steps to clean up the rolls, right?
Well, we've written to 19 counties in 5 states, and we've told them that they have to clean up their voter rolls. And we've told them that we want an explanation as to why their rolls the registration rates are high, and all these other factors I talked about. How come they haven't removed anyone in the past 2 years? How come they haven't sent the notices required by law? How do they explain that these are the answers that they certified to the Election Assistance Commission?
So they got dirty rolls and they need to do their job.
They haven't done their job.
So that's North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Colorado, and California. But Iowa isn't on that list yet. Will it be on the list?
We're assessing whether Iowa should be on the list. I mean, there are clearly counties that are underwater that have the wrong registration profile. There are clearly counties that have told the EAC, we're not putting words in anyone's mouth. They certified to a federal officer that the truth is that they had removed very few people for having failed to respond to a notice for 4 years.
Well, for what it's worth, when the Secretary of State puts out misleading information to distract from the fact that his voting rolls are dirty, it seems to me additional action might be warranted.
Well, I don't know why anyone would think that there's anything to distract from in Iowa, because it's all gone so smoothly.
Right. So,
I can tell you about their voter registration profile, but I can't tell you who won the caucus.
Right. So, the media's been out there smearing us. So-called fact checkers are suggesting we're wrong. Is there anything in our data that we need to fix or correct?
No. There was the data that was certified and that we analyzed. There's the data today, which may be correct, but tends to be consistent with the data we initially certified. There's the common errors we tell people not to make. It is so important, and so many fact checkers miss this. It is so important to understand that inactive registrations can be voted. And they write to us and they say, well, you're counting inactive registrations. That can't be right. No, you're wrong. You're wrong as a matter of federal law. You can't go into court and say that. That's simply wrong. Or they'll tell us that you need to look at total population. No, you only look at citizen voting age population. We've had a number of people write to us.
A 9-year-old on the list isn't relevant to
Or a
figuring
non-citizen.
or a non-citizen.
Or someone underage.
Yeah.
You know, you correct for that and you compare the registration numbers to people who could register. That's only logical.
We're willing to go to court based on the data that we've presented about Iowa, aren't we?
Yes, we're not looking to win a Twitter fight or a public fight with a Secretary of State over data, and we're correct, but that's not the point. We prepared this data so that we can sue people, which means we have to go into federal court and present it to a judge and convince the judge, and the other side gets to cross-examine and challenge it. We're doing this with a serious purpose. We're not looking for headlines.
So you've been doing election law for how many years?
Oh, you caught me off. 15 years? 15 years in an official capacity. I've been writing about it for 30.
So you've been a lawyer for 30 plus years.
I have.
As have the reporters or fact checkers persuaded you that your legal analysis and your approach on the demographics of voter registration are wrong?
No, what they've persuaded me is that fact-checking is the biggest scam in the history of the United States. I mean, you shouldn't be able to fact-check the law unless you're a lawyer. You shouldn't be able to fact-check statistics unless you have statistical knowledge.
So they're doing this kind of back-of-the-envelope calculation to try to attack us and smearing us in the meantime.
That would be my ultimate assumption or conclusion. I mean, you cannot state things about the law or things that are your opinion or things that you want to be true and then ding someone as not presenting the facts because they don't agree with you.
Look, you've been a lawyer for 30 years. You're a nationally recognized expert on election law. Is there anything these fact checkers or journalists have, in terms of pot shots they've taken, that have persuaded you that, oh, we got to fix our material?
No, they're distressingly the same pot shots that fail every election cycle. In fact, some fact checkers, I won't do air quotes, but some fact checkers have cited back to our work in 2017 and said that was flawed. And what's interesting about that is that a couple of federal courts did not think it was flawed, and we now have a couple of settlements in hand and a consent judgment saying otherwise, that was in fact a very serious business. So, you know, the fact that they're the same and the fact that they're off target, I'm completely not impressed with the business of fact checking at this point.
Thank you, Bob. So it sounds to me like lawsuits are in the offing.
Yes.
So we'll keep you updated on our efforts to, frankly, sue in federal court to make sure the voting rolls that you rely upon are clean. Thank you for joining us.